Well, thank you everyone for coming. Today's program is going to be done somewhat differently than what I used to do programs. Back in the good old days, I would have lots of overheads and handouts and stuff like that, and I really don't do that anymore. Partially because I'm too lazy to go through the process, but also because it's usually stuff that you already have, and it becomes a bit of a distraction. So what I've done is I've gone very old school, and essentially what that means is you're going to sit there and listen, and you're going to take notes, and if it matters to you, you'll do that, and you'll think of questions, and at the end we'll go over them and we'll talk about them, and this forces you to pay attention. And I found that it's very different from what a lot of folks are used to, particularly now, because we're so used to having these kind of multimedia presentations in which our senses are wonderfully stimulated, but at the end of the day, we've got nothing to show for it. So here you're going to have to pay attention, and hopefully you will and you'll like it. Other folks have. So, in addition, we're going to kind of get ourselves focused on why we're here. As you've known from most of my writing, that too often we've allowed spirituality to become some kind of just, if it's not, I mean, it's always had an opportunity for intellectual abstraction, but more recently it's become a kind of form of entertainment, as can very easily be seen on Facebook or any of these social networking sites. It's really degenerated. So we need to really reinforce within ourselves, both individually and here as a group, as to why we're here and what this is about. So follow with me in your mind as we recite the following prayer. Holy is God, the Father of all, who is before the first beginning. Holy is God, whose purpose is accomplished by his several powers. Holy is God, who wills to be known and is known by them that are his own. Holy art thou, who by thy word has created all that is. Holy art thou, whose brightness nature hath not darkened. Holy art thou, of whom all nature is an image. Holy art thou, who art stronger than all domination. Accept pure offerings of speech from a soul and heart uplifted to thee, thou of whom no words can tell, no tongue can speak, only silence can declare. I pray that I may never fall away from that knowledge of thee which matches with our being. Grant thou my prayer, and put power into me, so that, having obtained this gift, I may enlighten those of my race who are in ignorance, my brothers and thy sons. Wherefore I believe and bear witness that I enter into life and light. And with these wise words, although written by my decaying hand, remain imperishable through time, imbued with the medicine of immortality by the All-Master. Be unseen and undiscovered by all those who will come and go, wandering the wastelands of life. Be hidden until an older heaven births human beings who are worthy of your wisdom. And having sounded this prayer over the works of his hands, Hermes was received into the sanctuary of eternity. What we're going to be talking about for the first part of today is practical spirituality in daily life. And what does it mean to practice spirituality? In the past, one of the things we used to look at as people who we saw as spiritual is we had a name for them. And we often called them saints. And a saint means to be what? To be holy, right? Hence the little catchy phrase we put for the program, Sanctus, holiness. We have nice ideas about what that means. We say holiness means what? To be whole, to be complete, if you want. But what does that actually translate into? What does that mean in daily life and something that we can hang our hat on? Because I'm sure all of you have gone through lots of programs and lots of lodges and lots of activities, and you've heard all sorts of great words about things. You hear talk of adepts, right? You hear talk of masters. You hear talk of unknown superiors. And you hear talk of all these great elevated kind of beings. And in a way, they're so far distant from you that it's almost impossible for you to imagine yourself as having any relation to them. How many of you find that? When you read or hear about these things, say, What relationship do I have to any of that? Well, you have a lot. We'll go over what some of that is. But most importantly, when we look at them, we have to say, what's behind the words? What are the actions? What are the hallmarks of these so-called adepts or masters? Well, it's the same as the hallmarks of the saints, right? And it's kind of funny because everyone talks about having read the 3 books of occult philosophy. Or actually, they like to quote it. Very few people have ever read it. And very few people actually complete it once they've started reading it. How many of you actually have a copy of the 3 books of occult philosophy? How many of you actually read it cover to cover? Now, when you read it cover to cover, at the end of it, did you kind of want to throw it against the wall? And the answer is usually yes. And the reason for that is very simple. Because at the end of the book, all the way at the end, it's kind of like a novel. You should just flip to the back and read the last paragraph. Agrippa says, we have put everything here for you, but we just haven't put it in the right order. This is to make it difficult for you so that you must spend time with it to uncover the secrets. We're not just going to put them out there. And that's what he does. And a lot of them do that. And in the hidden away, one of the gems in there is that when you say your prayers, it's best to say prayers to the saints because they're closer to humans. Well, that's what the Catholic Church likes to say and used to. And of course, when Agrippa was doing this, it was a time when the Church was quite strong. But we can think of that and say, well, why is that? Is it that the saints are closer to us, or that we can identify more closely with them? How often when we look at these archetypes, these archangels and these gods and god forms that we're supposed to do our meditations on, again, we think of them as an abstraction. They're just an ideal. But the so-called adepts or saints were at least people who walked on earth, right? Hopefully they have a biography, something that we can look to, that says, wait, they were actual real human beings. They actually did this. That means there's a chance that I can too. So when we look at saints, marks of sainthood, its holiness, if you will, we find that they have 6 very distinct qualities or characteristics. And that is, they are a role model for others to emulate. They are a teacher of authentic tradition or doctrine. And doctrine just means teaching. Their lives have certain miraculous activities that mark them. And they're also a source of intercession. That is, they interrupt into human life and help people. Life for someone is going in a particular direction, usually not necessarily a good one, and voila, up shows this person, and their lives get turned into a better direction, into a different path. They have a certain rejection of material life, and when we say that, we mean they don't reject material life into the hair shirt fashion, although we see that. But what they do is they don't look at it as the ultimate definition of life. And for all of us, that should be very clear what is meant by that. We know that this world is very real. It's just not permanent. Things are constantly changing in it. We know that it is an expression of life, but clearly it's not the ultimate expression. The perfect example being given, what's the difference between a corpse and a live man? One is alive. And then how do we define that life? It's very hard. Yet if we were to stick to a strictly materialistic definition, we'd say, well, there's really not much of a difference except a single breath, They also have a certain revelatory ability. That is, it's prophetic as well as doctrinal. And what we mean by that is that someone who is walking this path and has achieved a degree of what we call integration, of course, is what? They've awakened within themselves the ability to perceive beyond appearances. We call that clairvoyance or intuition. And it doesn't have to be these great flashes of light that people talk about. More often than not, it's pretty straightforward. It's just seeing things as they are. It's that gut feeling you get when you're talking to someone and you say, oh, this person's telling me the truth. Oh, this person is a liar. Oh, this person's lying to me and they don't even know it. Or, wow, that was really profound. More often than not, that's how intuition and clairvoyance take place. We're encouraged to look for the miraculous as being almost super miraculous. It's always got to be fireworks. More often than not, it isn't. And if you look at your own life, you'll notice those times when you had those kind of insights or those revelations. They were clear, they were profound, but they were also simple. Now, we say prophetic in the sense of directing people. Prophecy is really meant to tell you, and particularly when we look at the prophets in the classical sense, such as the Old Testament prophets, they're meant to tell you what is going on. This is the direction life is taking, and this is what you need to do, because if you continue down this path, bad things normally happen. That's usually what prophets end up doing. Now, occasionally you get another type of prophet who tells you some good news is coming. Okay? That something is going to happen, usually beneficial. But more often than not, a prophet is decided to guide us. Guide us on what? Back to the path of return, the path of awakening. Now, why? It's pretty straightforward. Because we're walking this path, but we're like a drunken man on it. We often fall into the ditch, and we need someone to pick us up and push us forward. If we didn't need that, we'd be what? We'd be enlightened beings. A lot of this stuff is pretty simple, but we don't think about it. On the other hand, we also have revelations in terms of doctrinal teachings. That is, someone who has a degree of integration also has the ability to give you some teaching, some insight, right? They don't just quote old text, but they breathe new life into them. And that life is what? The life of their experience, what they happen to have, what they bring to it. Now, each of you has probably met someone like this in your life. Maybe not they match all of these qualities, but you'll notice they match some of them. And I know Phil and I have joked a lot about this, there's always that old Italian lady who can, as soon as you got the problem, she just goes and does her novena to Saint whoever, and next thing you know, things happen. We've got down the street here, it's where I go to get all my uncooked pasta. All the old women in the back got their Padre Pio stuff going on. So I figure my food is pre-blessed. We're good to go. But think about it in the common sense. Think about with these characteristics and traits that I've mentioned, and think about the people that you have met. And you'll see that this notion of holiness, on one hand, is much closer to you than you may have thought, and at the other hand, there's still things that we need to work on and aspire to. But we have to make the decision to aspire to them. See, we don't think of sainthood as something which you aspire to, holiness. We don't think of it as something as an aspiration, because it's become tainted, meaning a kind of a separation from life rather than an engagement of it. But we do, through our own circles and our own levels of initiation and membership in different groups, we do get told we need to aspire to adepthood and mastership. But how often have you been encouraged to do that, but were you ever told what that actually means? How many of you have ever told what that goal is? I mean, you may get something innocuous like knowledge and conversation with your holy guardian angel, and then no one can even agree what that is. So how are you to aspire to something if you don't know what it is, if you don't know when you'll be there? It's very difficult. So here when we look at what is these markhoods, these key marks of sainthood or holiness, at least we have something to look to compare ourselves to. Something that's interesting too is within the framework of sainthood being dismissed from contemporary esotericism, two other things have been dismissed from it, and these relate to it, and that is the nature of relics and the nature of pilgrimage. See, back in the good old days, before the internet and mass publishing, if you wanted to learn something, you had to make a significant and tremendous effort to do it. And some of you have made a significant effort to come here today. And yet, would you really think of this trip as a pilgrimage? Probably not. But it probably fulfills the aspects of one. You've decided to take a journey at a certain amount of cost and risk, whatever that is, to go somewhere to learn about something that hopefully will make you a better human being. So for on the bare framework of it, we could consider this in some respect almost a pilgrimage for you. Now, you probably don't think of our library hall here as a holy site. We're certainly not like, what is that great place up in Montreal? The great cathedral up there? Yeah, St. Joe's. It's not like St. Joe's Oratory. Yeah. Wonderful place to go to. But in a sense, it almost fulfills that requirement for you. Because you've made a decision to go somewhere to hear something, to hopefully integrate it into your life that will make you a better person. And why? Oh, because it's all about you. Oh, no. To make you a better person so that you can be helpful to others. Because if you're not helpful to others, what's the use of any of it? And that's probably one of the hallmarks that is missing in modern esotericism. The self-absorption of my getting my knowledge and conversation with my holy guardian angel and all my great experiences that come with that or don't come with that. And nowhere along the line does it ever really talk in most of these teachings about, well, have you been helpful to anyone? What have you done to make your life and the lives of those around you and the lives of those of you in your lodge or your temple or your circle a better place? Yeah, see, that's the real test, isn't it? Yeah, it's kind of interesting, too. I like to bring this up, is how often is it that we go into our fraternities and our brotherhoods and we have all these great ideals, and yet those are one of the places where they first fall apart. By the fruits you will know them. So it's important when we're engaged in this work that we take advantage of the fact that we have brothers and sisters on this path and help them in the kind and generous way. Like we're told in Freemasonry, right? You will gently tell a brother or reprimand the brother of his failings, lest he bring poor repute upon himself or the good name of the order. What's that all about? That's about becoming a better person. And that also means that someone may do it for you too. But you have to learn to listen. So, along with pilgrimages are those things which we call relics. And relics we often associate with a holy event. A relic is a naturally created talisman. Or, talisman, yeah. And it is naturally created by the very fact of its relationship to a person and a series of events. Now, we often like to joke that there's enough true pieces of the cross floating around out there where we could build several arcs. And while that is true, more often than not, relics come in simpler ways. Those are those things associated with someone or some place. And how often haven't you seen it where someone dies and someone, of maybe some spiritual renown or associated with your organization or your order or what have you, and people say, well, what's going to happen to his ring? What's going to happen to his robes? What's going to happen to his stuff? All those things associated with his work or her work. And why do people want them? Well, often we see some strange and peculiar activities around them. People like lurch after them, they grasp after them. But because they envision those objects as what? Infused or imbued with a certain amount of power or qualities of that person. Otherwise, why would you want it, right?
eBay.
Yeah, eBay. Because someone else wants it and they'll pay you more for it. So when we look at those things, we have to look at what are those things around us, in a sense. It goes back to what is it we do with our daily actions? How are we in the first part as a person? What are the people we look to for spiritual guidance? What are they like as people, in that first section? But also then, how do we view our activities in terms of spiritual pursuit? As I said earlier, too often we look at it as entertainment or distraction. I mean, if you, in your mind, look at coming here as a pilgrimage, it reframes the whole experience. If you look at some of the things you will walk away with as I said, a natural talisman, a relic, if you will, a reminder of the lessons of the day and of what sanctity really means in terms of wholeness and holiness within yourself, it reframes it in a completely different way. And that's what spirituality is all about. It's really, to use that phrase, to reframe things, to see them differently. How often we look at something as it is, but we just don't get it. And as anyone knows, you can take a bad picture, put it in a good frame, or a good picture in a bad frame, and people will see it differently. Women know this far more than men because they're more concerned with their appearances, hair and dress and all that kind of thing. And that's probably to our detriment to some degree as men. But the fact is, they know very well that if you present something in a particular way, it looks differently. People respond to it differently. That's why we always talk about the interview suit. What's the thing you wear in the interview, right? Or the special tie. Every guy has that one tie that they always wear. And that's, in a sense, a relic or a talisman, too. You habitually grab for that one. I have one that I always wear for funerals. That's the one I wear for every funeral. This is the one I wear for every interview. But that's, in essence, a way of reframing things. How slowly and methodically over time our attitudes, things changes. We give it a specialized purpose. There's nothing sacred about Crowley's Coke span. But someone may think of it as such, or it may just be something to spend more money on. But in the end, what a pilgrimage is about and a relic is about is that specialized power that is undertaken for the purpose of purification of our sins or the attainment of insight and illumination. That's another thing we don't like to talk about, is sin and purification. But sin means to err, to make a mistake. And when you make a mistake, you got to fix it, whether it be on your math test or in life. Now, the nice thing is, on your math test, it's easier to know what your error is because the teacher points it out to you. In life, it can be a bit harder. Life will point it out to you, but if you're not willing to listen, then you're out of luck. It can also be meant to undertake for a particular purpose. I knew many people in the 90s who really would take these kind of alchemical pilgrimages. The purpose was very specific. To go to a place to learn from someone particular alchemical knowledge. They viewed the whole thing as a very kind of sacred experience. And it was. And there's really no difference between that and getting on the plane. Except where? Where is the difference? In the mind of the person doing it. The attitude with which they undertake the action. That frames the entire effect. Everything in life is cause and effect. We know that, but how often do we ignore it? And our attitude, the reason for which we do something, is the cause. That is the frame. That is the whole decoration. That's, on the cake. Which makes it so much more enjoyable and more meaningful. Which leads us to the single most important question that all of you now have to ask. And that is for all of the time, talent, and treasure poured into your various esoteric and occult practices. All you need to do is ask yourself the question Frater Albertus asked all of his students. What are the results? What are the results? All you need to ask yourself. And then pay very close attention to the answer. At the end of the day, are you a better person? Cornelius Agrippa stated that we each have a multitude of angels governing us or seeking to influence us at all times. And that those good angels affect us, particularly a good person, in a profound way. And that is, they elevate them. They raise them up on a level that they weren't previously experiencing. And we don't mean that physically. What do we mean that? We mean that internally. They're raised up. What do we mean? They see wider, more broadly. They're able to understand more. Things are more clear to them. But that for a person who is not of good character, those evil spirits, what do? They bring more chaos into their lives. Now, we don't have to necessarily think of these as typically good angels and bad demons as we think of in so many magical works. We can simply look at them as ideas, because in the end, that's what they are, is they're ideas. What do we let with these ideas in our lives? How do they affect us? When a lot of these books on magic were written, again, there was no mass media. You have to be very, very careful about the ideas you let into your life. What you read, what you watch, what you listen to. All of these things are the angels and demons of your world, of your universe, of your mind. And you get to decide what's in there. Hopefully. And if you do decide, then those things which are good are strengthened and expanded upon. One of the things he said is that good spirits, according to Iamblichus, purge souls most perfectly. Some bestow upon us security. What is mortal in us, they take away. What is mortal in us, they take away. They cherish heat and make it more efficacious to life. And by harmony do always infuse light into an intelligible mind. That which is mortal in us, they take away. Those things which are of what? Of duality, of a transient nature, which is passing. They cherish the heat. That is, the heat is stronger. Heat is life. Fire is life. As we'll see in the second part of today's program, it's all about the fire. They make it more efficacious to life, meaning the heat has to be managed. You have to deal with it in a manner that is useful rather than destructive. And by harmony, they infuse light into the mind. They infuse light. What are we after? We're always after illumination, and an illumination is actual light. It's not a metaphor. The perception is of light. The mind perceives a particular form of light. Okay. And it's infused in a manner that is harmonious. It's not disruptive. Although at times it can be or seem that way. Okay. So to put it in some simple terms, our soul, or what we would call our subconscious. We don't have a subconscious. We are a subconscious. That's what we are. Everyone wants to know where they're at. Say, where am I in my spiritual development? Have I become an episemist yet? Say that 10 times real fast. Maybe you will be. Well, there's a very simple way to know. As you are when you sleep is how you are in reality. That is the litmus test. As you are when you sleep is how you are in reality. What you dream about, what you do in your dreams, all of those things are the real you. You cannot lie to yourself. How you experience sleep is how you will experience death and the afterlife. That is how you will actually encounter any of these spirits, should you actually have any success in your ritual work of evoking them. But more importantly, it's how you'll experience life and death. Now, this raises the question then, what is the key to our work? What is the key to unlocking this great mystery so that our esoteric work, our spiritual work, bears fruit? We get our little apples, our little grains of apples that we then get to collect our red mercury and make our stone with. Well, in the Gospel of Mark it says, "And one of the scribes came up, and hearing them disputed with one another. And seeing, he answered them when asked, 'Which commandment is the first of all?' And Jesus answered, 'The first commandment is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. And the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There are no other commandments greater than these.'" We see in Corinthians, St. Paul says, "And if I have prophecy and know all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so that I can move mountains," or we could say, call up Beelzebub, "but have no love in me, I would be nothing." Now, how often in our esoteric training is that ever stressed? Very rarely. Because most of our training comes at a time when contemporary religious training was dismissed. But when these classical sources are being written, it was understood that you were expected to have a kindergarten knowledge of scriptures. Otherwise, how can your talismans have any value? At least not for Agrippa. And then, what is the end of it all? Again, how are you as a person? Why this matters so much is because if we're talking about integration and all things being connected in one, then how you treat others is essentially how you treat yourself. If you want to be if you're kind to others, then you will be kind to yourself. But if you're kind only to yourself and dismissive of others, why should the universe care at all about your visualizations for health or wealth or winning the lottery? Of none. Nature seems to want to help, or at least support, the greatest possible good with its energy. Meaning nature is incredibly stingy. It takes a lot of energy for us to be here. When you really stop and think about it, it takes a lot of energy for us to be walking on this planet. So if we're going to be consuming all that energy, and I'm not talking in some, environmental sense, I'm talking in a metaphysical sense, okay, then what are we doing with that? One of the things I like to quote is the words of my perfect teacher by Patrul Rinpoche, who was a Nyingma Lama in the 19th century, one of the greatest Nyingma Lamas. And he said that without bodhicitta, which is compassion for all living things and the desire to assist in ending their ignorance and suffering, teachings on the philosophical views and meditational practices, however profound they may seem, will be no use for us in attaining enlightenment. Tantric practices like generation phase and perfection phase, which is for us assumption of the God form, okay, for those of you who don't know what those are, and so on, practiced within the context of bodhicitta, or compassion, lead to complete awakening in one lifetime. But without it, there is no different from these and other practices. He goes on to say that in the end, what is this doing for you as a person? Now we say, what are the reasons for our work? Now, we like to say that all spiritual or all religious pursuits are the same. How often have you heard that, right? But that's not true. We know it's not. Because we're all familiar with people who undertake different practices for different reasons, as we've just said. Some are only concerned about themselves, some are concerned about others. Some so-called spiritual practices aim at enlightenment, which is what? An inner awakening. Others look for what we think of as, in contemporary, say, Christian or Islamic practices or Jewish practices, well, Jewish not so much, but Islamic, would be salvation. And salvation is not the same as enlightenment, right? They're very different. at least on the surface. Now, esotericism, or esoteric views, as we'll talk about a little bit, will show that there's different levels of meaning to these, or there can be. But just up front, when we look at them, for us, they're different. That's why we've chosen different paths. However, we will say that if we look at different spiritual pursuits, even superficially, they are designed to do a few things that we can look at in common. And that is, they're designed to bring happiness in some fashion into our life and to avoid suffering. And this is the great point. This is where I say, nobody comes to magic because of altruism. And if you say you do, you're a liar. Very few people come to alchemy because of altruism. And if they say they do, they are a liar. You come to it because you perceive something as missing from your life, whatever that happens to be, and you want to fill that void. And if you don't admit to it, you're a liar, and then it's never going to work for you. Because first of all, you're lying to yourself. You got to get that confusion out of the way if you want it to work. You got to be honest about it.
Mark.
Yeah.
You mentioned some things here that I could relate to in a way that maybe I could say the most motivating force that you're describing here is desire. It's desire to receive, which motivates people to do lots of things. And the way, or at least in my own experience, is that the way creation, or God, creator, works is he's constantly wishing to bestow. And we always want to receive. Everything that we do is motivated by, I want to receive, whether it's good, bad, money, sex, whatever it is. And the more we open ourselves up to this desire, and the more we let the Creator give, we evolve and we go past all it, because at a point, you get to a point in your life, you get saturated. And those things have no meaning anymore, and you constantly want more. So as you said in the scriptures, love God above everything else. And the more you give, the more you take, the more the Creator gives, the more you give back.
Well, we'll talk about that in the afternoon too. There is that point, is what is the fundamental notion, or what is the fundamental drive behind everything? And on the unconscious level, it is desire. The question is, that's always a selfish motivation. So what we have to do is we have to move beyond it, because if we're completely selfishly motivated, we destroy ourselves.
Which is very much the Eastern thought that desire is the cause of sorrow.
Yeah, it is. But again, there the problems too is you can't make it go away.
Right.
So what you have to do is you have to simply know that it goes away on its own. See, the biggest part of desire is trying to keep something that you can't keep. This is where the saturation comes in. You know, that this comes and this goes, and that's okay. And that's where we talk about imperturbability, particularly within the Masonic context, imperturbability. And we'll go over that, and we'll go over some of that wonderful poem that Kipling wrote regarding it. Yeah, but that's the notion. It's not coldness. We're not talking about a kind of cold indifference where you reject things, because that's a form of attachment too. But it's where you're okay with what's going on. Now that doesn't mean you're okay with letting bad things happen. You have to know when to act and when not to act. But there's a certain level of that requires a certain level of insight. Okay.
That's where the safeguard, as you were talking earlier about bodhicitta and compassion, that's where the safeguard comes in with the Eastern practices, where there has to be a mindfulness and awareness of our actions and our interactions with other beings.
Well, that is correct. And my point is that existed within traditional esotericism up until the period of the Golden Dawn. I mean, essentially, let me not pull any punches here. Anyone practicing anything from the Golden Dawn onward cannot only but fail. It will be almost impossible for you to achieve the promised goals when you look upon, well, who within it's done it. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to debate it with you. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm just going to say, look at the teaching, look at the tradition, look at the fruit. That's all you have to do. You wouldn't trust I mean, it's like anything else. You're going to go to Harvard or Yale or Oxford because they have a pedigree. And the teachers there they're pre-vetted. That doesn't mean they're perfect in their fields, but it means they're really, really good at whatever they do. Okay? And in a sense, what we've done is we've said, those things don't matter anymore. We're saying it's almost as if the modern esotericism is really kind of like the equivalent of an internet college. Okay? It has value for learning certain technical things, and it's very good for that, but the human interaction isn't there. And the human interaction is what causes us to evolve. It's the human interaction that forces us to begin to say, what am I as a human being? What is this doing for me as a person? And that's particularly true, say, you were at Oxford, right? I mean, it's not just the fact of learning, it's the whole experience of learning. The culture of what you learned there stays with you your whole lifetime. And that's the same in esotericism. The culture that you learn in the lodge, in the circle, in the group, whatever it happens to be, that's part of the whole experience, the environment, the world, if you will, the microcosmic expression of those ideals that you grow in. Okay. And because modern esotericism has not put any emphasis, for the most part, there are a few exceptions, and I know of them, okay, but because very little emphasis is placed on compassion and awakening, and there's an actual disregard for Scripture. It's looked upon.
Misunderstanding by them, if anything. No, I agree with you.
But that misunderstanding starts at the top, and it's perpetuated at the top. And that's just, and I'm talking about a variety of groups here, where the emphasis now is more on me, what can I get? What can I get rather than what can I become? What can I do?
Or rather, how can I serve?
How can I serve? And in the Golden Dawn, that's one of the questions, and it's in a lot of them too, in the early neophyte degrees, is, why have you come, to learn in order to serve? Okay, so that being said, that is the safeguard. That is the safeguard. And that's the key to it all. You get rid of that, the whole thing falls apart. And I've known quite a few people, and that's the thing they always would come back to. Now, with that, in eliminating our own suffering, we can say that there's some subpoints in this, and that is limiting or removing completely the fear of death, understanding a sense of our place in the cosmos, or at least relationship to the divine or God if we're theistic, and means of improving our quality of life in the present moment, whatever or wherever that may be. If you look at the traditional initiatic practices, the classical period, those were always deeply involved with removing fear of death. That is partially contained today still in the Masonic initiation. Okay? At least of the third degree and that of the chamber of reflection. Those are very, very important practices that, again, have been too often either removed or ignored. And what has been put in place of understanding removing fear of death is what? How to develop your psychic abilities to do X, Y, Z. Not that those aren't important, but they're given too much emphasis. Because you can have all that but still be afraid to die. Okay. The second is understanding our place in the cosmos and the relationship with the divine. That's really what we call knowledge and conversation with our holy guardian angel. That's just a fanciful phrase for it. And then thirdly, if you've gotten rid of that fear of death, or at least mitigated it, if you have a better understanding of your place in the cosmos, then it's what? Improving the quality of our life at the present moment. See, again, improving the quality of life, because if you don't have a good quality of life, you can't do these practices. You got to have a roof over your head and food. You got to have your basics taken care of. So again, there is a place for that. It's just a matter of we have to make sure that all our bases are being covered in our day-to-day work. And again, as Phil had mentioned, what do we see again and again? We see the words of, all things will be given unto you. And we see the words of Patrul Rinpoche. If you feel a certain certainty from the depths of your heart that you can practice without caring whether you die or not, you will never lack food or clothing. Meaning that if you can just do your practice without concerns for the day-to-day stuff, it'll pretty much take care of itself. Doesn't mean we don't have to put some effort into it. We do. But that effort is smoothed over. It's smoothed over because as we focus on our practice, what happens is a lot of those neurotic thoughts and tendencies get smoothed away. Perfect example is how often any of you haven't said, I'm going to do my talisman for, I don't know, whatever it happened to be, something that was important to you. Or you're going to do this creative visualization to achieve something. But you can't get it out of your head, right? You can't let it go. You can't let it go. You can't let it out of your head because you're so afraid that it won't happen that you just got to hang on to it more and more. And then what happens is more and more energy builds up, and that energy's energy of what? Is it confidence? No. It's the fact that it's not going to happen. And then when it doesn't happen, you've already have the scenario lined up of how the dominoes will fall and your whole world will collapse. So in fact, what you've done is spent more time, more energy focusing on that than you have the goal that you want to achieve. And the only way you can achieve that goal is if you have confidence. And the only way you can have confidence is if you focus on developing a harmonious relationship with yourself and others. And those others aren't just the physical others either. It's the non-physical ones too. Now, one of the times when we look at these scriptures, we have to look at some things that are said. And every scripture has at least 3 or 4 levels of meaning. This is talked about. The doctors of the church stated this, and anyone who's a decent historian or theologian will tell you this too. And one of the things that we see is this statement in Scripture. And of course, again, it's not possible to be working with Agrippa and not have some fundamental understanding of the Old and New Testament. It doesn't work. That's what it's rooted in. Sure, it has other stuff too. But the examples that it gives are examples of that culture. Okay, in that time, of which we are an extension of. And one of the things it says that, on an outer level, we see Jesus saying, I and my Father are one. And really, people can see that as God as a thing, as the big sky daddy. And that's okay. For us, we could also look at another level. What is that archetype? What is that God form? I and the God form are one, if you want to look at it in those terms. I and my ideal are one. What is that ideal? It's a pure ideal. The Father is also what? Heavenly creative force. There's harmony there. There's integration. Because he tells you what? Be ye perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Right? And that where is the kingdom of heaven? We went to Sunday school. Come on. Where is the kingdom of heaven? It's within you. So be ye perfect as the kingdom of heaven within you is perfect. And that has multiple levels too. One of them is the inner level of our own mind, our own subconscious, which is what we really are. That whole collection of ideas that we hold deep within us that often only arise in that fleeting moments when we close our eyes and try to meditate and all sorts of stuff flies up to the surface, or when we're falling asleep and we get to see all this clutter that comes up, or in our dreams. Okay? The other is the inner heaven is what? The inner energies of our psychic body. Okay? And how they function and work. and what they're the archetypal representation of. That we have to be as perfect as they are. And what is perfection? It's without error. And what did we say error was? Sin. And that's an attitude. It's an attitude. It's really funny because a lot of folks I've worked with, one of the things we do is do a little bit of work with sacred geometry, in which we draw different polygons and stuff like that, and you have to do it with a ruler and a compass. And it's somewhat daunting work in the beginning, especially to folks who aren't really happy with their high school geometry class, or it's been a long time since they've done it. But they begin to realize as they do it, just not only what fun it can be in that precision, in bringing preciseness to the work that you do, but also that they represent a pure ideal. That those archetypal forms expressed through number and geometry represent an energy that our more anthropomorphic ones don't. And it's really kind of fascinating. But they also realize that at some point, no matter how much you work in this world, nothing is ever perfect. And there's kind of a joke about that, where they say these guys who weave oriental rugs, they always make a mistake in it, because only God is perfect. And for me as a writer, someone who's written 4 books or something like that, or actually more than that, but and edited others, I like to quote George Lucas. He goes, a film is not something which is completed, it's a project that's abandoned. And that's the way it is with a book. You have to know when it's done. It's done now. And what we end up with doing in our search for perfection, we have to realize when it's done. When we're done. That's good. And that's where the harmony comes in. You're okay with it. You're okay with things as they are. You've done your best, you do your best, and you're okay with it. Now, if we want to be someone who is an adept or a master, we used to call them saints or holy people, again, we must devote ourselves to it. We must aspire to it. That this is a realization that we have to put energy into, no different than any other area. And that requires 4 areas of activity: study, practice, accomplishments, and service. Study would be any of the traditional scriptures, which would include the Corpus Hermeticum, the Chaldean oracles, hymns of Orpheus, any of the ancient Greek works on theurgy, as well as the Old and New Testament and any commentaries. Because if you're not working with those, you're really not working in the domain of Western esotericism. You may be working something else or related to it, but essentially those are the foundation texts of it. Now, I have a certain affection for G.R.S. Mead. He was associated with Madame Blavatsky in the Theosophical Society, and while he has been somewhat criticized for his total academic objectivity, given the time in which he wrote, that wasn't such a big deal. But what we appreciate about Mead is that he gives a tremendous amount of insight that a purely academic view doesn't. He had tremendous insight into the essential meanings of the things he was translating. So, Mead's Thrice Great Hermes, Studies in Hellenistic Theosophy and Gnosis, is very good. Fragments of a Forgotten Faith, Gnostics, a contribution to the study and origins of Christianity, and his Pistis Sophia, a Gnostic Gospel. These are very nice things to read. And what's nice about them is they do what a translation is meant to do, what the original text is meant to do, and that's inspire you. It's meant to elevate you. It's meant to lift you up. It's meant to expand your sense of self, your sense of possibility. A pure translation often doesn't do that. And that's just the problem. That's the way it is. That's why it's often good to read several different translations and commentaries. I also would encourage reading the books of 3 books of occult philosophy. The 4th book, this is good. Skinner's book is good. I haven't read Tyson's. Has anyone read Tyson's commentary on the 4th book? I haven't read it yet. I don't know. Ovid's Metamorphosis is good too to read. And of course, the Sacred Magic of Albert Mellon, the new version that came out, and the Picatrix. But you need to read John Michael Greer's translation. I understand from several folks that while the other translation, which I have copies of, is beautifully published, just wonderfully published, it is not effectual.
Did you say the Albert version by who? The new translation?
Who is the author? He's a German fellow. It's published by Ibis Press. It's what's the name? Does anyone remember who it is? We'll find it over lunch. We'll look it up. I think there's a copy out here.
Is it the translation of the Campus?
Well, we'll look at it. Okay. Now, some other books to include would be the Triumphal. For those of you who are interested in alchemy, you may or may not be. The Triumphal Chariot of Antimony, the Hermetic and Alchemical Writings of Paracelsus, The Great Art by Pernetti. The Great Art by Pernetti. It's very important that even if you're not interested in alchemy, that you read the introduction by Edward Blitz, the Grand Master of the Martinist Order of America, particularly those of you who are interested in doing ritual work. The Egyptian hieroglyphs of Flamel, of course. Yes, just when you thought it would get boring, I'll give you something interesting. Additional texts to read, of course, anything on Jacob Böhme and Boehmian Theosophy, Swedenborg. Those of you interested in Martinism should in particular read Böhme and Swedenborg. Okay. As well as Saint Martin. St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa, the Cloud of Unknowing, and also the follow-up to the Cloud of Unknowing, which was this, A Letter of Private Direction. Those of you who read Cloud of Unknowing and Private Direction will find that the teachings in there are almost identical to the Tibetan Dzogchen within a medieval Christian framework. My favorite one, which is barely pronounceable, is the Hypnoaromatia Polyphile, the translation by Jocelyn Godwin. Those of you who are familiar with Dr. Godwin's work know that he is brilliant, and that his translation of this text is considered, and it's about that thick, by the way, maybe I'll bring it over after lunch, is a profound and fabulous insight into what is called in alchemy the language of the birds, or the multi-leveled symbolic language of the Renaissance magicians and later alchemists. The text was considered nearly untranslatable because of its multiple levels of meaning. But you'll see that if there was, everyone joked if there was anyone who could do it, was him. And again, his Alchemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz, too, of which we did tremendous work with many years ago. Okay. I would read those because he brings a tremendous amount of insight, not just translation, but the entire essence of it is brought through. Anything specific to astrology, of course, Christian Astrology by Lilly, but you can also find more online with Christopher Warnock's Renaissance Astrology site. Those of you interested in symbolism, and of course you're encouraged to read about it, I have found the Dictionary of Symbols by Sirleau to be very useful, as well as Tarot of the Magicians by Oswald Wirth. That's a very difficult book to get now. It's out of print, but it's well worth it, because that book is his deck, of course, is the foundation for the Waite deck, the Crowley deck, and other decks. So I would encourage you to look at that. The Tarot by Munisadu is not simply a book on tarot, but is embedded in every chapter with an extensive amount of occult practices from the Martinist tradition. But you have to pull it apart. You can't just read it. You have to take notes as you read.
What is it?
The Tarot by Munisadu. Mounisadhu. And of course, the Hermetic Tarot by the unknown author, who's you now know who he is, considered to be one of the finest books on Christian Hermeticism in the 20th century, by none other by Antoine Faivre. And Antoine Faivre sat at the Sorbonne in their chair of esoteric studies. I had the opportunity to meet him for several days years ago, and it was very funny because he read a paper that I wrote on the Hermetic Kabbalah. Actually, he sat down. There was a publisher sitting next to me, and we just started to talk about Martinism. And Antoine came by, and I said, well, I defer to the professor. And he goes, no. He said, He said, oh, that was very nice, but you needed to mention Buma. Sweet. Okay, thank you. So he read a paper that I'd written on the Hermetic Kabbalah, and I got back a good, very good, and it was very funny because Jocelyn Godwin said, well, always the professor, at least you got a B+. I was happy I got that. And of course, a lot of alchemical and Rosicrucian translations by Adam McLean are very good to have and useful for your work. All that does is that provides us with information. We got to feed the brain. But now what do we do with it? We've got to practice it. And how you practice it is going to be very particular to your school of thought. Many of you belong to various esoteric groups. You already have a field of practice. So what I'm about to say, of course, is generalized, and you will have to decide how and where it fits into what you're already doing. But some of the things which we have found very useful is, of course, the writings of Willy Schroeder. His book, Rosicrucian Notebook, his commentaries on Agrippa are very useful. Initiation into Hermetics by Franz Barden is useful. It is very dense, though. It is really a condensed book. It is essentially a kind of Kabbalistic yoga, Raja yoga, for lack of a better definition.
He's a tough read, though.
He is. His Keys to the True Kabbalah are good, but there's other books on the Hebrew, the energetic qualities of the Hebrew alphabet that are out there as well, that are a little better. But his is okay. I would stay away from his book on evocation, only because, as I've been told by several people who knew the publisher, that the sigils do not match the text. Okay.
That's why it didn't work.
If you can get the first 3 degree lessons of Amorc that were published in the 20s and 30s, I would get those, as well as if you can get their 8th and 9th degrees from the 30s. Of course, you're all familiar with Ceremonial Magic and the Power of Evocation by Dr. Leszewski, which is an extended commentary on the Heptameron by Peter de Bono. Fundamentals of Esotericism by Jean Dubuis, as well as his other work, Contact with Eternity. All of these give practical work. All of these books give practical work. And of course, any of the Philosophers of Nature coursework on alchemy and esotericism and Kabbalah. A very good book, which I encourage all of you to get, is Culpeper's Medicine, A Practice of Western Holistic Medicine by Graham Tobin. If you don't have that, I encourage you to get it. It is a very fine look at medieval medicinal practices and how they related to alchemy. It's extremely useful for those of you who want to study Renaissance alchemy and astrology. Because the Culpeper's Medicine, A Practice of Western Holistic Medicine by Graham, Graeme Tobin, Tobyn. It's a little bit of a dense read, a lot of color plates, very good. Because, again, during the Renaissance, alchemy, astrology, talismanic magic were all interrelated very closely. And this book is a very good way of showing how that was done, but specifically in relationship to general medicine of the time. John Michael Greer's The Art and Practice of Geomancy, and, of course, Pagan Dreams of the Renaissance by Jocelyn Godwin. There's 1 or 2 copies out here you can look at if you want. It's a very fine book to help you understand the nature of then how these ideas were put into place in the day-to-day life of the Renaissance. How the physical buildings and the physical structures, the creation of the books and all this stuff was an expression of these archetypal ideas. It didn't just exist as an idea, but was what? Transformed into daily life. Now, we see that a lot in how the archetypal idea is transformed into an expression, which we call ritual. But ritual is not an end in and of itself. It's meant to have an effect. Here we're seeing the ritual is bypassed and the pure idea and inspiration is contacted. And what? Voila. We get these fantastic pieces of art and literature and insight and science. So how does this, again, how do these ideas affect us in daily life? And that's what we see again in what is the pagan dream of the Renaissance in that book.